Hi everyone, welcome along to the Comet 25.2 Rhea release webinar. My name is Mason. Thanks for joining us. I'm coming to you live today. It's 9 AM here in New Zealand. Pretty rainy morning here in Christchurch, New Zealand. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. To make the time zones easier, you're welcome to subscribe to notifications about when we go live. It's all on the webinar platform, and you can get notifications that shows you in your time zone when our next presentation will be. And after this presentation, we will post the recording on YouTube. So if you're watching the replay on YouTube, then hi from the past. But if you're live with us this morning, then thanks for coming along. And as a special thank you for making this live time slot, we're doing a live question and answer session. We'll take questions as we go. So on the webinar platform, there's this chat and questions widget in the bottom right corner of your screen. So just click the button to pop it open. And if you have any questions during the presentation, just write them in and I'll do my best to answer them at the end. If you're a long-time watcher of this series of technical webinars, welcome back. This is episode 32. This is quite a milestone actually. An IT person might say 32 is a nice round number. And if you're a brand new watcher, you're welcome to, of course. Let's start off with just the essential Comet background information. So there are 2 release tracks for Comet. Every week, or give or take, we publish our absolute latest changes as part of our Voyager rolling release series. And then 4 times a year, all of these changes get bundled up into one new major quarterly release. And we've found that strikes a really good balance of getting that early access, early feedback, and then that builds up. And then by the time you get that quarterly release, all of the changes have, people have run the gauntlet, it's been battle tested, it's ready for production. So the quarterly releases are, they sort of accumulate all of that stuff from the last 3 months of changes. Now it's up to you which track you follow. For the majority of our partners who do follow the quarterly releases, we have just done that bundling up, and we're very proud to have launched our latest release, Comet 25.2 Rhea, and that rolls up all the changes we've made in the Voyager series throughout December, January, and February. So that process wound up in February. You can see our version numbers are 25.2 being year and month. So today we'll be covering the changes and new features we've added in the last 3 months. That sort of 3 months covered the Christmas and New Year's period. So often the .2 releases are a little bit quiet for Comet, but this year we managed to achieve a lot of great new features. So that's about the version number, and the code name for this release is Rhea, and this release is named after one of Saturn's moons. All of our releases are named after solar system objects. So this is Rhea. It's a moon of Saturn. It's about as big as Australia, going by surface area. It's the second largest moon Saturn's got. They've got one bigger called Titan. And this photo here was taken by the Cassini spacecraft. And it was sent out into space by a joint NASA, Europe, Italy project, sort of a heartwarming moment of international cooperation. And in this photo, there's sort of these white wispy lines that are just actual giant cliffs of ice. So the same as the last moon we looked at, Dione. Something that's not in this photo, and not in any photo of Rhea actually, is Rhea has maybe got rings around it. It's sort of up for debate. The story goes like this. So Saturn has got a magnetic field like Earth. And this moon, Rhea, is like a giant ball of ice and rock. And it casts a shadow of that magnetic field. And so the Cassini spacecraft is flying by, and you think when it flies in and out of the shadow, you should notice you're going into the shadow of the magnetic field. You see the magnetic field coming and going. Something else happened first. The magnetic field was actually shadowed by something else, something ring-sized and ring-shaped. So it seemed like there was a ring around this casting a shadow. And so that's fascinating. If this moon has rings, it would be the only moon in the whole solar system to have rings, so really special. So the Cassini spacecraft swings back around, tries to turn around and take a photo of the ring, but in the photo nothing was there at all. So what's going on? Is it a false alarm? Is there a ring or not? Or how else do you explain the shadowing? Maybe there's a whole new discovery out there waiting to be uncovered. So that's the story of Rhea. But enough about the name and enough about the moon. What about the Comet backup features? So in the changelog for our release, we've listed 11 features and 14 enhancements. And in today's presentation, we'll go into detail about these features and what's new when you upgrade from the previous quarterly release, 24.11 Dione. Now, the presentation today will probably be about 30 minutes long, more or less. That's including some time for questions at the end. I know everyone's busy, so thank you very much for coming along, and we'll try and keep to that schedule. Hope you've got a coffee, get comfortable, settle in, and we'll just get underway. First of all, a bit of an announcement that it's 2025, new year, new us. We are updating some names of our products. So recently we've started saying the Comet Management Console. You need a management console to manage your customers. So this name is crystal clear about what it does, why you need it. And previously it was called Auth-Role. So we had this thing called Auth-Role that I think some people really got and clicked with, and some people didn't. So roles are a thing that Windows Server has to say, oh, you know, my server is doing DNS role and DHCP role and Active Directory role. And we've been using this terminology since Comet's first public launch. But over the years, I think we've had plenty of people confused by that, and I would say a possibly increasing trend with the move to the cloud, move to Linux, a bit decreasing relevance of on-prem Windows Server. That trend has got a long way to go yet. But we do have today a greater contingent of customers who are not already familiar with the role-based terminology. So now the management console is where all your users are. So Comet's available in Comet-hosted and self-hosted editions, I guess. And when you self-host Comet, you run the self-hosted Comet installer, and that used to install Comet Server and the little orange Comet Server Service Manager app. Now it installs Comet Core and the Comet Core Service Manager. It's the same thing, of course, but since it's now Comet Core, this new name really helps out in the cases where we're talking about the server, you know, and when this happens in support cases and sales cases, when people talk about the server, you know, does that mean Comet Server or the server where you're running Comet, or maybe the customer's server or the Windows Server operating system? And so just by renaming Comet Server to Comet Core, we've made it a bit clearer and less ambiguous that this is, you know, it's the core of your Comet infrastructure. And lastly, on the right, Storage Gateway. So with the self-hosted Comet Core, you get both Management Console and Storage Gateway. And when you use our Comet-hosted Management Console, you actually just get Management Console. And so with the old server names, this was actually a bit confusing, but with the new Management Console names, it's really obvious that the Comet-hosted Management Console is just the user management part, and Storage Gateway. So Storage Gateway is the gateway for storage. Maybe that's on-prem storage going to on-prem drives, or maybe it's an MSP-hosted storage gateway that's, you know, forwarding to a cloud service. And it's optional. You know, the storage doesn't have to go through the gateway. It could go directly somewhere else. So overall, I think these new names are clearer, and hopefully we get 10 years out of these new names like we did with the old names. When you upgrade to Comet 25.2 Rhea, you'll see some minor changes basically related to this new naming. But if you're a seasoned Comet professional, then these changes, it's not major, it's just a little rebrand. You'll see a few pieces of text changed, but nothing too scary. With that out of the way, I'd like to talk about the first major new feature in Comet 25.2 Rhea, which is Restore as VM. So this was a big request from our feature voting system. Many of you requested this feature, and we've been quietly working towards it over the last few months. When you do a backup in Comet, whether that's a backup of Hyper-V, VMware, or a disk image backup, there is now a new option in Comet to say, hey, I want to restore this backup as a VM, directly restore it back to Hyper-V or VMware. It's extremely simple, it just works. And no matter which one of these you pick, you can mix and match. So most often, surely, you'll be doing a Hyper-V backup and restore it to Hyper-V, or do a VMware backup and restore it to VMware. But if you are migrating away from VMware and you still haven't finished your migration, you may be interested in perhaps doing a VMware backup and restoring it to Hyper-V. That just works, it's seamless. And actually, if you're migrating between hypervisors, then Comet can continuously deduplicate before and after the storage. We can deduplicate a Hyper-V backup and a VMware backup together. So it's extremely storage efficient. I glossed over this one. You can restore a disk image backup job direct to VM. So this is a physical to virtual or P2V process. So Comet supports taking disk image backups on both Windows and now also on Linux. So this is a really interesting option. When you're backing up a laptop or a physical PC, We detect how much RAM and CPU cores and whether it's BIOS or EFI, and all of that gets fed through into the default VM settings that are created. So like I said, it's extremely simple. You go to restore, you pick one of these options, let's say restore to Hyper-V, and then on the next screen you pick what VMs you want to restore, and then you fill in the connection details and you're ready to go. So for Hyper-V, there's one setting, which is where you want the VHDX files to go. And for VMware, there's all of the connection settings to your VMware vSphere and ESXi servers and data stores and networks. But all of those settings will be automatically pre-filled from your protected item settings. So if you're backing up and restoring back to the same VMware server, it's automatic, everything's auto-filled for you, but you can do a cross-restore to a different VMware server, for instance. So extremely simple to do all of those situations. Don't need to think about anything too hard, which is exactly what you want in a restore scenario. It's nice when things just work in a restore. So that is Restore as VM. It's available from both the web interface and the desktop app. We're extremely proud of this new feature. We've spent quite a lot of time testing it out under various different scenarios. Very happy to be able to release it confidently for all of you to use. It's a really common workflow, so I'm sure you'll get a lot of use out of it. Another really interesting change in Comet 25.2 Rhea is what we're sort of calling storage vault device ownership. Now this is maybe a bit more advanced topic. So in Comet, you've got user accounts, and each user account, maybe it has one device, one sort of endpoint agent installed, or maybe it has 100, maybe more. And there's a question about how many devices should you put in a user account? And I think a lot of the time the answer depends on you. It depends on the company or customer you're selling to. It depends on how many people should be sharing the same user password. How many people should be trusted to restore each other's data in an emergency. And within a user account, you can have multiple storage vaults, or you can have one big shared storage vault that all of the devices use together. Now, storage vaults are the boundaries of deduplication. So sharing a vault is really good for space-saving reasons. You know, if you've got all your devices have a lot in common, say they're all running Windows, or they're all using the same software, or they email each other and they've all got copies of the same emails, copies of the same work files. You know, deduplication is going to save a lot of space for you, and saving space means saving money, means more margin. So shared storage vaults, there's some really great benefits of doing that. There's one particular downside, which is related to all of the devices stepping on each other's toes in that storage location. And Comet works really hard to avoid this. We have a lot of tips and tricks and techniques to allow one device to back up safely to shared storage at the same time as other things are happening. And this includes concurrent backups, concurrent retention passes, devices going offline. And there's a lot of really complex situations when they're trying to deduplicate the shared data. And Comet handles them mostly perfectly, but there are limitations. And if you have 100 devices all sharing a storage vault and you put half of them in a cupboard mid-backup, there might be some problems with safely coordinating what can and can't be done with a storage vault at that time. And we're always working on improving that, and there are some really important core upgrades in Comet 25.2 Rhea that make Comet more resilient to that. But the big picture is that sometimes in these really crowded situations, it's just better if the devices have their own vaults, and then there's no problems with that sort of lock coordination at all. So to share or not to share, it's a trade-off. There are pros and cons. Normally it doesn't matter, but this is something you might run into if you have dozens or hundreds of devices all sharing the same vault. So in Comet 25.2 Rhea, there is a new choice. When you create the user account, do you want to create a storage vault now, or leave it so that every new device can have a new storage vault created just for them? And so this is mostly going to be useful in those cases where you have a lot of devices in one account, where the devices come and go, and you may be experiencing lock coordination difficulty. If all the devices had their own vault, no problem. So this feature works in a few ways. You can set it up when creating the account. You can also change the setting at any time, either on the user settings, or you can apply it in bulk using a policy. And one of the options in both cases is to use the system default storage template, which is something you can set up in the global server settings. So lots of ways to set this up. And so this is all about helping you set up separate storage vaults for each device that joins the account. Now, even when each device has its own storage vault. Storage vaults are still shared for the whole user account. So in order to keep devices on the rails of only using their personal vaults, we have this new concept called vault associations. And so when a device uses a storage vault, or if it has a schedule to use a storage vault, the vault gets sort of claimed by that device. And by default, the device will only see the vaults that it's claimed in any shared vaults you might have. So this means you stay on the rails of that one device, one storage vault pattern. But of course, at any time, you can click the show other device storage vaults checkbox, and all of the other vaults will show up. So in an emergency, you can still do a cross-device restore or anything like that. You'll most likely face this when upgrading to Comet 25.2 Rhea, so I hope this is all coming across loud and clear. And hopefully it can make your Comet experience actually a bit smoother. If you have a large account with many devices in it, just separating out the devices into separate vaults means things can work more smoothly at the expense of deduplication, but it's your choice either way. Next up, just a quick notice about Impossible Cloud. Just a reminder that Comet integrates with many storage providers around the world. So Impossible Cloud are a company who provide S3 compatible storage based in the EU. So they're an EU company through and through, EU data centers, headquartered in Hamburg, EU developers. So if you're a European customer and you're considering your data sovereignty position, just nice company to be aware of. Works great with Comet. And recently in Comet, we added support for Impossible Cloud as a storage template, so you can easily provision new storage vaults for customers, like I was just talking about. And in the latest Comet 25.2 Rhea release, we've improved this support by doing two things. First of all, we've added a custom Impossible Cloud option for storage vaults. This means that any Impossible Cloud storage vaults that you make will show up as Impossible Cloud rather than generic S3 compatible. So that's nice, so you can see what's going on at a glance with that logo. And of course, there's an option to hide this for white label use cases. And additionally, we've updated to support all of Impossible Cloud's latest regions. So there's a second Germany region, there's a Benelux region, and a Northeastern Europe, which I assume means Scandinavia somewhere. So check them out, or if you're not in the EU, then Comet supports many other excellent options, including Wasabi, Backblaze B2, and our very own Comet storage offering. Next slide, security features. So while preparing for this presentation today, I was reading over the changelog and the release notes, and I noticed a few common themes. So the next few slides will group some smaller features and enhancements into themes. So Comet 25.2 Rhea has seen a theme of new security features. So first of all, there is a new way of configuring IP rate limiting. So this is a feature for saying, hey, these IP addresses, they're using a lot of bandwidth, I want to throttle that. Maybe this is for storage gateway. And Comet has supported this feature for a long time. It used to only be configurable on the config file, and then last year the rate limit settings were added to the web interface, but you had to sort of write out a regular expression for the IP range that you wanted to target, which is fine, but maybe a bit cumbersome, especially if you're not a regex wizard. And so now in Comet 25.2 Rhea, there is an easy-to-use IP address builder. It supports all the classic regexes that you might have already, but also easy to understand single IP address, as well as a subnet builder. So if you're CCNA or Network Plus, or you've run across CIDR before as a way of grouping ranges of IP addresses into subnets, you can target a whole subnet with these bandwidth rate limits. So nice wee IP address builder. We've taken that and ran with it, and now you can also set up IP allow lists for admin accounts. So say this admin account can only log in from these IP addresses, which is a nice security feature. Sort of a form of two-factor. If you think about, some people talk about two-factor being something I have, something I know. Is it valid to say somewhere I am, some network position? I don't know, but maybe that doesn't count exactly as two-factor, but it's definitely a defense in depth technique for securing your access to that Comet admin account. So in this settings dialog, you can set it up for other staff admin accounts, or you can also set it up for your own account on the My Account page in the top right of the Comet interface. As well as the IP security feature, you might have spotted another new feature in here in the screenshot, which is this checkbox here, enforcing an admin password change the next time they log in. So Comet has long supported this for end user accounts. Like if you create a new end user account with a random password, send them the password, require them to change it on first use, that's fine. And with Comet 25.2 Rhea, that feature is now extended to admin accounts. Another security feature for both admin and user accounts is that we can now rate limit failed login attempts. So if you log in with an invalid password too many times, you get hit with a cooldown timer. And this is intended to help mitigate brute force attacks against your Comet infrastructure. And it was also a popular request from our feature voting system. It took us a while to build this one because one of the things that we struggled with brute force attacks on the internet today is that it's somewhat easy for attackers online to get access to a lot of IP addresses. And then if the cooldown only blocks one IP address, then it's annoying, but the attacker doesn't care. They just move on and attack you from another IP address. And a corollary of this is actually most ISPs these days use CGNAT, and so many real people share a few IP addresses. And so if we block an IP address that's hitting the Comet core, one person failing to log in could lock another person out. And this actually really applies for business internet connections, corporate internet connections, where you've got one IP address for the whole company. Blocking the single IP address can have quite a lot of collateral damage. So another idea instead is to have the cooldown apply to a user account. You know, everyone's trying to break into the admin account. Let's put cooldowns on the admin account logins. But that actually is a threat vector in itself because it provides a way to lock someone out. You know, if you want to stop someone from logging into Comet, you just constantly attack that account with bad logins, that account would get cooldowned and then they couldn't log in. So really difficult situation. We're sort of between a rock and a hard place. Blocking the users has problems, blocking the IP address has problems. So the approach that we ended up with was a hybrid point-based system. If someone tries to log in with an invalid login, the username gets a point and the IP address gets a point. And if a login comes in and their combined username points and IP points cross the limit, then they get put in cooldown. In this combined system, it gives a balance between the strengths and the weaknesses of these two ideas. It means users can almost always safely log in, even from shared IP addresses, while we still mitigate many possible brute force attacks. So not a perfect system, but definitely a really useful tool in your toolbox. This setting is available for self-hosted users if you're running your own Comet core. Whereas for the Comet hosted management console, this part is, it's on us. We're responsible for the security centrally instead. So that's it for rate limiting failed login attempts. A last new security feature in Comet 25.2 Rhea is we've upgraded our SSL baseline. So Comet has its own internal HTTPS server. We don't use Apache or IIS or Nginx or anything like that. It's completely internal. And we keep it up to date with the latest HTTPS security guidelines and recommendations. We often refer to this. You might recognize the Qualys independent SSL labs test that gives your HTTPS security a letter grade. If you haven't seen it before, I do recommend looking it up and trying it out on your own website. Comet has maintained an A grade score ever since our first release. With every release, we have consistently hit A grade at the time. And at this latest Comet 25.2 Rhea release, we've pushed our point score slightly higher by phasing out some unused triple-DS legacy key exchange algorithms, so that's always nice. There is an A+ score. It's possible, but we're not aiming for A+ at this stage because every time we look into it, it seems like it would require us to drop support for quite a lot of real-world users. But A grade is really good. My next themed slide is under the hood. So this whole slide has no pictures, so I've put them all together at once so that you don't get bored of not having pictures. But hopefully the text will wake you right up though. 40% lower memory usage. Major reduction in Comet's memory usage. This applies to the endpoint agent. Doing backups, restores, retention passes, reindexes, you should see a significant improvement. So sometimes Comet can use a fair bit of memory for deduplication, especially the bigger your storage vault gets. Say, we need to say when you're backing up a new file, does this new file I'm backing up, does it match any other content I've ever backed up? that fingerprint matching deduplication needs memory to do that comparisons. And if you run out of memory, it's okay. Comet has a low memory mode that does the fingerprint matching using temporary files instead, although it's a bit slower. But now that Comet uses 40% less memory, you may be able to revisit that setting and go turn it off, go back to the fast mode. And for everyone, of course, this is just so great. It means less overhead on the customer's machines. It means a backup job will have lower impact on, whatever their actual business workflow is. So maybe you can run backup jobs more often during the workday. Huge, huge improvement. I can't state enough what a fantastic reduction this is. Also, granular restore. So granular restore is our feature for if you do a disk image backup or a whole VM disk backup. You've got basically a large virtual disk file, and granular restore is our feature for picking out individual files from inside that virtual drive. We had a good long look at the way this works and the patterns that granular restore makes when accessing the virtual disk. We made some informed guesses about what part of the disk is going to be accessed next. By loading that in advance, Comet works one step ahead. It's doing two things at the same time, and overall that shaved the overall time down a lot if we get the guess right. Our guesses are really good and we do get them right, and that's why this headline number is 3 times faster. If we get the guess wrong, we have to download about 1% more data. So that's a pretty cheap overhead for possibly a pretty major 3 times speed improvement for granular restore. Major headline improvements for Comet 25.2 Rhea. There are 3 more under the hood changes to quickly cover. First of all, we've rebuilt the disk image feature on Windows to better juggle what disks you have attached. This should help Comet figure out what disks and drives are attached in those odd cases. But you might not realize there's so many odd cases, not just RAID and dynamic disks and storage spaces and ReaFS, but things like, I have a USB drive dock that's halfway plugged in and I ejected it and then put it back in again. That kind of thing. It should all work a bit more reliably now, so that's also nice. Also more reliable Hyper-V backups. So to be more specific, there are 2 ways of doing Hyper-V backups in Comet. You create a protected item for Hyper-V, and you've got the choice between choosing all checkpoints, that uses a VSS-based technology, or the new latest VM state only option, and that uses WMI-based technology and supports change block tracking, CBT, for improved performance. So there are some pros and cons. The improved performance of latest VM state mode is a big pro, but many people choose to back up all checkpoints with the older option. So the older VSS option, when you're backing up all checkpoints for Hyper-V, this uses the Hyper-V VSS writer. And it puts quite a bit of workload on the VSS writer during the backup. In particular, the Hyper-V VSS writer seems to buckle at the knees when faced with doing too much at once. The VSS writer is also involved with VM migration, VM replication, and so on. And so it will occasionally fail to hold up a backup workload at the same time. So in Comet 25.2 Rhea, we have split up the workload into making lots of little requests to it. Each one has a smaller workload, and the Hyper-V VSS writer handles this much more seamlessly. And it's more likely to work on a loaded system that's also doing VM replication or migration or whatever. So Hyper-V backups should be more reliable going forward if you're on the classic all snapshots mode, although this will have no effect on the new fast latest VM state mode. And lastly, under the hood, there have been improvements to the Linux-based recovery media. So last quarter, we launched Linux disk image backup support, and along for the ride was our recovery media feature. So recovery media is a bootable image. You boot into it so that you're not working from your main OS while you're overwriting your main OS, sort of that sort of thing. The recovery media has both Windows and Linux base options, but in either case, it boots from a USB or ISO straight into the Comet interface. You log in and do your restore. So there's no need to worry about being a Linux expert because both Windows and Linux are available. In the Linux recovery media, we've improved our LVM integration. So when you restore an LVM partition, we automatically sync and refresh all of the LVM state so that the restored partitions appear properly immediately after the restore. And it just makes it seem like Comet works more obviously, like everything just works. Okay, so that's under the hood, 40% lower memory usage, up to 3 times faster granular restore, lots more reliability improvements, all now available in Comet 25.2 Rhea. But that's not all. User experience, last slide for me. So first of all, you can now put your users into groups. So this is from the Comet Management Console. To create a group, there's a green Add Group button on the Users page, and then you can select users and move them into the group. So this is really convenient if you have a lot of user accounts. You can also toggle between grouped mode and ungrouped mode if you want to see your users grouped or ungrouped. We have streamlined the restore process a bit. So when you go to, there's 2 main ways we've streamlined it. When you go to restore a disk image protected item, there was always a screen like this, front page picker, where you can, you get the choice of how are you doing the restore. Are we restoring to physical devices? Do we want to granular restore? And hey, you can see the new restore to VM options here at the bottom. But additionally, as well as this screen, there used to also be, you get through I've selected my disks, I've selected where I want to restore, and then on the very last screen, there was also a drop-down of where do you want to restore that had more advanced things like restore as files, restore as zip, restore in test mode only, restore as advanced program streaming input, and so on. And so now in Comet 25.2 Rhea, we've combined all of these options into the front picker page. So you will now see this front picker page for all protected item types. Previously, only some of them had this front page. But showing the front page for all protected item types makes the UI a bit more consistent. Perhaps it opens your eyes up to some options you might have missed, like restoring to zip file or restoring databases directly into the database and so on. Now, some of the options are pretty advanced and not widely used, so they are hidden under the Show Advanced Options checkbox. But it's up to you. Take a look and see what else is available. Another improvement is we've changed the page where you pick what snapshot to restore. So up till now, you go to restore, the first thing you have to pick is what backup snapshot do I want to restore. And until now, it would list out the protected items and just say latest. And if you wanted any more detail, you click the show all button in the top. Now that's just done for you automatically. So when you go to restore, you see immediately all of your backup snapshots that are available for restore. This brings the web interface in line with the behavior of the desktop interface. And the main reason we didn't do this sooner was a compatibility thing with old device agents connecting to a newer Comet Management Console, but we've run the numbers and made the call that in 2025 this is a safe move. So now the restore dialog works more consistently between the web interface and the desktop app interface. Another consolidation like that we've made is for the schedule editor dialog. So last year, or maybe the year before, the schedule editor dialog in the desktop app was redesigned to streamline the layout and show you the schedule times directly on the front screen instead of on a back tab. The web interface didn't get the same treatment, and so it looked a little out of place. We've now updated the web interface to have the same tabs and layout as the desktop app. So just making Comet more consistent between our 2 main interfaces. Storage template settings moved. So for this point, over the years, we've found a lot of users up to now have been a bit confused about the difference between storage role and storage templates, or to use their new names, storage gateway and storage templates. For example, if you want your customers' backups to go backing up direct to cloud, better to just have a template that can stamp out those cloud accounts. Or are they backing up to your IT company's appliance running the storage gateway software? Are you operating a storage gateway? Are you providing a storage gateway on-prem, or are you hosting one in your own data center? By bringing out the storage templates into their own settings screen, this means that storage templates and storage gateway will both have their own page. And we hope that really helps to highlight the difference between them and get people choosing the right option for their use case. This also highlights storage gateway as a quite separate concept with its own reasons to choose it. Last few things. So policy reassignments. This is a fascinating one. One of the things you can do with the policy in Comet is to create a protected item by policy and say, oh, I want to back up C drive /program files my line of business application. And I'm going to put this settings protected item into a policy, and then I'm going to apply this policy to hundreds of users all at once. Fine, cool, it works great. If you have a policy that applies to some users and it has one of these forced protected items, it's being forced applied to the user account, and then you change the user's policy, what happens to the protected item? Does it stay linked to the policy and therefore disappear from the user? Or does the protected item stay with the user and just get detached from the policy? And now in Comet 25.2 Rhea, it's up to you. You get to make that decision with a new dialog box that prompts you for the answer when you reassign the policy. Webhooks are now easier to edit. So Comet supports webhooks. So you get this in the settings page. It's actually here on the integrations tab. Webhooks allow Comet to automatically push events to an external system. So maybe that's a monitoring system or a CRM or something. If you want to know when a user logs in or logs out, or whenever they run a job, or whenever a job fails, a webhook can then notify your other systems. So a really cool feature. We've seen some pretty advanced use cases from our customers, and in Comet 25.2 Rhea, the settings for that are easier to configure, especially if you want to only know about certain types of events rather than all of them. And lastly, the dark mode is clearer and easier to read in some places. So all up, that is a lot of user experience improvements. It all adds up to a pretty big release, Comet 25.2 Rhea. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to pop them in the question widget on the right-hand side of your screen. For a recap, I talked about the new names, so it's now Comet Management Console and the Comet Storage Gateway. I talked about Restore as VM, the new feature to restore VM backup jobs directly to Hyper-V or VMware, as well as mix and match for migrations. This also supports restoring disk image as VM for those physical to virtual migrations and sort of quick start disaster recovery. I talked about Storage Vault device ownership. That's that new process to streamline one device, one vault relationships. That's an optional trade-off between having a shared vault with the best storage efficiency or separate vaults with independent sort of coordination. I talked about the latest updates for Impossible Cloud, that EU storage vendor that works well with Comet. Lots of new security features, the IP settings, rate limiting for brute force attacks, and then the major under the hood changes, 40% lower memory usage, up to 3 times faster granular restore by working with those, heuristic ahead of time access patterns, and then just a grab bag of UI and user experience improvements, the user grouping, the restore dialog, and so on. So any questions? I can see there's actually quite a lot of questions today. First question, how do we decide which release cycle to follow, quarterly or the continuous Voyager, when Comet Hosted updates everything automatically? So this is a really interesting question. The Comet Hosted sysadmin team are responsible for making that choice actually in the Comet Hosted environment. And the Comet Hosted sysadmin team almost always choose to follow the quarterly releases. So if you are interested in following Voyager at this stage, the only way to do so is to self-host a Comet environment. There's another question here. Is there any way to keep only the latest stable release when doing a Docker install? I don't want to have to change the version number in the compose file every time there's an update or accidentally go to Voyager release with a pull command. Right, so for the Docker release, we currently tag the containers. We have :latest, which I think points to the latest Voyager. And then we have individual version tags for each version that's available. We have year-month releases, but I don't think we have like a :latest quarterly. That would be pretty trivial for us to add. So I will talk to engineering and we'll see if an update can be made there. But as an interim workaround, I think your best option is to pin to a specific quarterly release, like 25.2, without the third digit. Another question here, when might we see XCP NG backups as an option? So I realize there has been a fair amount of interest for alternative hypervisors, especially in the wake of what is happening with VMware in the market at the moment. We're seeing a lot of interest, particularly for Proxmox and Hyper-V as the primary, I would say, beneficiaries of the exodus of VMware users. We're aware of XCP-ng as an option. Our primary decision making for this is based on, there's real world constraints around staff availability. We can't work on everything all at the same time, but we're really interested in hearing what our partners are using because that guides our priorities for what we build. We have made the choice to develop Proxmox as our next integrated hypervisor, but we're acutely aware that there are others in the market. So please, if you want your voice to be heard, please go to our feature voting page and make sure you upvote the XCP-ng feature request, and then maybe we'll get to that shortly afterwards. I'm aware that they're both sort of QEMU KVMs in under the hood, so there's probably quite a lot of synergy and code reuse that might make an XCP-ng integration possibly a quick follow-up after the Proxmox integration. But yeah, we're quite heavily focused on Proxmox and improving our Hyper-V support, basically as a result of current events. Another question here regarding the use case of last use Vault and policies for new Vault features. So we are one account, one client. Each new device gets its own Vault. Want policy to set a new default item or schedule to use the newly created Vault. Closest we can get is last use Vault, which doesn't tie to just created Vault. That's an extremely interesting question. I'm going to need more time to come back to you with an answer. I've got your details here, so let's follow up in the support ticket system. Another question here, any plan to be able to have Google Workspace backups like we have for Office 365 now? Yes, please upvote the feature request to help us keep track of that. We've actually been really pleased with the growth and uptake of Office 365 backups over the last year or so. It's become a truly reliable, performant, and profitable part of the Comet business. And this has really given us stronger grounds for expanding our cloud protected item types in the future. So you may hear more from us in the future. In short, though, the decision making around prioritization for features like that is based on demand and real world uptake. And we have found that in Comet's primary markets, the US, EU, APAC, Office 365 did have significantly higher market share than Google Workspace. So obviously Office 365 was prioritized based on that, but just market realities. We're interested in Google Workspace. Please let us know and make your voice heard by upvoting the feature request on the feature voting page. This really helps us gauge the popularity, and that feeds into our decision-making process. So we've absolutely considered it. I don't have anything to announce today, though. Another question here, it's great to see 40% lower RAM memory usage. Are there any plans to reduce CPU usage for full disk backups on Windows? There's two main users of CPU usage during a full disk image backup. One is just general CPU usage for compression and deduplication and encryption, which we are constantly working to improve. There's no headlines I can point to. And there's a second particular use case that you might be referring to regarding the way that, ordinarily you wouldn't see a high CPU load in Comet because various things happen during a backup, right? We have to read from the disk, we have to do our compression, encryption, deduplication, and then we have to upload to the storage location. And so most of the time you are limited by how fast you can read from the disk, or you are limited by how fast you can upload to the storage. And it's very unlikely to see high CPU usage in Comet because the CPU is just 100 times faster than reading from a disk or uploading to the internet. That's just the reality of CPU speeds versus internet speeds in 2025. It does come up sometimes, particularly in cases where we get empty data, we do a lot of processing on it, and then we upload nothing. And that's the sort of situation in which you might see high CPU usage. For the recent Linux disk image, we built the processing in a slightly different way that is less susceptible to this, and you are unlikely to ever encounter this on Linux. And based on the feedback that we're seeing from the Linux disk image, we may be able to reapply some of these innovations to the Windows code shortly in the near future. So yeah, please stay tuned. It's absolutely an option that we can improve. The only other thing I would say is that Comet, when it runs, it always sets itself to the lowest CPU priority. So even though it may look like Comet is using a lot of CPU, Comet will give up that CPU at the drop of a hat if any other process on the PC wants the CPU for anything. So if you've got a busy PC that's, maybe it's doing Active Directory, maybe it's, running a line of business application, Comet will use as much CPU as it can to do the backup as fast as possible. But if anything else is running, Comet will give up the CPU. It tells Windows, it tells Linux that we are the lowest priority process on the system, and anything else is free to take the CPU away from us. So actually, I wouldn't worry too much about high CPU usage, even then, in that case. Another question here, will you be adding scheduled bandwidth limiting soon? This has been a really popular feature request on the feature voting page. I can actually tell you that we're currently in the process of updating the schedule system to improve the design and how it correlates with your schedule settings and your retention settings. Right now they're set up separately, but actually they have quite a lot of fundamental overlap. So I can tell you we're not actively working on scheduled bandwidth limiting, but it's absolutely in scope for discussion based on we are currently improving the scheduling system in a nearby area. Another question here, for restore as VM, disk image to VMs, does that include Linux disk image? Yes, it does. So when you take a disk image backup, you can take disk image backups in Comet from both Windows and Linux machines, and we have a unified storage format from it. So once it's backed up, it's just a virtual disk, and then from there we can create the VM in Hyper-V or VMware. So works perfectly well for both Windows disk image backups and Linux disk image backups. Another question here, does Windows backup work on ARM-based processors? ARM-based processors have taken off a little bit in the last year, especially with Qualcomm's new Qualcomm Snapdragon Elite chips and recent Copilot PC initiative. Comet works fine on Windows on ARM. I believe disk image, you may encounter some limitations. I don't have all the details available, but Comet, generally speaking, does work fine on ARM-based Windows. Another question here, will you have live migration solution? That's really interesting. I know we've got quite a lot of the pieces involved. We've got, we can talk to Hyper-V, we can talk to VMware, we can read the data, read the VM out and write the VM back. Live migration is something a little bit more complicated. A live migration really needs to keep the VM running, set up a stub VM here, and when the VM that's in the target location, the VM needs to start up before it's fully restored, and it needs to trap when the VM tries to access part of its memory or part of its disk that hasn't finished being migrated yet, that needs to dynamically pull from the other machine. It's a somewhat different product category, unfortunately. Comet, we really want to focus on just making the best possible backup and restore software. It is possible to use Comet to migrate VMs from one platform to another, and it can be an important tool in your toolbox. But if you have high availability requirements around that VM migration, there may be other products in the market that can do that live migration with lower downtime. That's quite a lot of questions. Thank you, everyone. I think that's all the questions we have time for today, but we still want to hear from you. If you have any questions at all, we're always happy to help out. We're more than happy to hear your questions by ticket through the usual ticket system in the Comet account portal, or you can email us hello@cometbackup.com. Or did you know that we do support phone calls? So just click the link on the website to book a call. Now, our company is based in New Zealand. Now, these days we do have staff available round the clock for technical support. So it's pretty likely that if you need technical support, you will be able to book a call in your time zone. But if you want a sales call or if you need some types of advanced technical troubleshooting, we'll need to still figure out a good time that suits your time zone and New Zealand time zone. But we're more than happy to jump on a call. And often that's a very quick way of clearing the air and getting answers to any questions that you might have. So that's all from us here today at Comet Backup. Hopefully you've managed to take away some useful information. Please check out the latest version of Comet 25.2 Rhea. All users of the previous quarterly series, 24.11 Dione and earlier, you're encouraged to upgrade, get that 40% lower memory usage, but we're happy for you to continue using older quarterly versions if you feel like it. Hope you're all keeping well and safe, and you can expect another webinar for the next quarterly release next quarter in 3 months' time. Cheers.